Good morning, not good afternoon, good evening, or not because there is only one person online. Thank you very much, Dr. Okunen, and I will introduce you later. But good morning. So nice to get you online. He's the only one person there because we thought that if we would not uh, communicate with the event online, there would be more people in the room. Well, this was before we knew that there was a general strike today, that we are on the first step on this event. So we are inaugurating and launching something new. So, well, maybe the audience is not as much as we would have thought. I know that there will be some more people joining because of government in transport. Will, as I said, we'll hope there will be more people in the future. But before that, well, thank you for being here. You are fellows from MAK'IT, you are students, you are colleagues, and that's great to have you here, and that's great to have you with this new step in MAK'IT life. And you saw that we put the S at talk. It's talks. So it's we talk of today, but we expect many more talks in the future. And this is really the new series. And I will try to explain why and what we do expect from that, and why we are here today. First of all, in this MAK'IT journey, I'm not quite sure everyone knows about MAK'IT. So I will say a few words about the Institute and then explain why we are engaging in this new series of talks. Well, good morning. I will not say good morning every time that someone is speaking. But there will be more people. Well, MAK'IT is one of the members of the big family of the Institute of Advanced Studies. Institute of Advanced Studies, we put a K in MAK'IT rather than S, to emphasize the knowledge dimension and the different sources of knowledge. But Institute of Advanced Studies has been created in the beginning of the 20th century as organizing space for free thinking, reflection about science, about the epistemic nature of science. Well, the first one was with Einstein. So we will not necessarily Princeton, we will not necessarily try the comparison, but then there have been more institutes. There are more or less 100 at the moment in the world, and the issue of those institutes are to welcome scientists and to offer very generally from other countries and to offer a space to do that. In Montpellier, there for quite a long time now, there have been a lot of scientists coming from abroad and coming to Montpellier and saying, wow, that's a fantastic scientific community, but how can we interact with this scientific community? And this is also one of the reasons why we created MAK'IT, is not only to organize a free space for scientists to think about their practices, but also to interact with the local community. So MAK'IT is quite young as in this family. It has been launched in March 2019 by the University of Montpellier, but together with the members of what we call Montpellier University of Excellence, that are all the research institutions based here in Montpellier, and that decided to work together on the connection between societal challenges around agriculture and food, environment and health. This is what we summarize in feed, protect, and care. And the assumption behind MAK'IT was number one, that we need to transform the world. We need to organize transitions, but the transitions are somehow linked by our incapacity to engage in dialogue and to design the knowledge that is necessary to engage in dialogue. So the basic assumption of this institute is to organize the collective work, collective dialogue, transdisciplinary exchanges, and with a focus on controversy. And our basic assumption is to say, if we reuse our collective capacity to address controversy, we will be in a position to better engage in transition and to better push forward the transition. So as you can imagine, at the heart of the institute, there are two issues that we will begin to discuss today. Is number one, transdisciplinarity. It's part of the DNA of the institute. And number two, science, society interface, and the need to address, discuss, to address, and to have engagement in addressing controversies and controversial topics. So, since we were very happy that despite the pandemics, we have hosted 41 scientists so far from all over the world since 2020. Despite the context, three of them are here today. Eduardo, Bram, and Andrea, but maybe they will probably come to the discussion, and Viviana should also arrive. So at the moment we have 8, and from 5 more will arrive soon. So that means that in 2 years' time we hosted 50 scientists so far, with a duration of 3 months to 1 year in Montpellier, and we are very happy about that. There are 4 different calls. I will not get into detail, but we have the computer, and you can go on the site. You can have more information on the website. There are 4 programs and 1 pilot program that we do not launch to get artists, journalists, and non-academic actors on board to interact with scientists, with the fellows who are here. But then, and this is the origin of these talks, we also assume that we do not want to work in a bubble. That is to have those scientists arriving here, but we want them to interact with the Montpellier scientific community in the 2 directions, so that the Montpellier community can take advantage of their presence here, and then they can know better how to interact, to launch new initiatives, to launch new projects, to move forward. And so as a rule, we ask all the fellows to be hosted by 1 research unit. And the 41 fellows that have come to Montpellier so far have been hosted by 30 different research units. And this is a wish that we really irrigate and drain and build this community together. This is also why the origin of these talks. It's exactly why we launched that. Is that when we organize such interaction, we realize that colleagues from the community here in Montpellier were eager and keen to participate in those events as well. So because we have weekly seminar with all the fellows every Thursday morning, but they used to be somehow closed with a very interactive and free participation. And the few persons from the Montpellier community who have been part of that said, okay, but we would like to be more present in that. And so we decided once a month, more or less, to open those seminars and to have a program so that we can widen such an interaction and have this connection between the fellows and the Montpellier research and academic community as a way to challenge ourselves freely, as a way to also launch new initiatives and new partnerships. By the way, you'll notice that I'm speaking in English. It's just because some of them of the fellows do not understand French, or English is the common language. It's not just to make us apart from the Montpellier community. And some students who are coming from South Africa, they present also are not yet familiar with French language. So, well, we decided to do it and to organize this free space for dialogue more like once a month, and we will see how it works and how we can adapt and navigate. And I really hope that gradually the Montpellier community will take advantage of this, which is not yet the case this morning. By the way, we launched the institute just before COVID, which somehow was a bit ambitious, because attracting people from other countries and organizing the mobility in the COVID context, you can imagine how difficult it was. And nonetheless, I think it's somehow a good indicator and a good success that we succeeded to host 41 of them during this period. So we decided to organize the first talk of these talks, a day of national strike here in Montpellier, just to challenge us a bit, and just to verify if for the second time the very adverse context would or not be an obstacle for our success. So it seems that that was, of course, a private truth. Well, so the talk today is on implementing transdisciplinary. And well, as I say, it's part of the DNA. Hello, Nicola.
Hello, sorry, we were lost.
No problem.
Sorry.
So it's on DNA. DNA is part of the DNA. Transdisciplinarity. Transdisciplinarity is part of the DNA of the institute, and we all know in this room, I think, that transdisciplinarity has emerged long ago. It's not something new. Right from the 70s and 80s, and there has been ample thoughts and literature about that, and many definitions, many different practices, perceptions, and what we try to do today is to begin looking at the diversity behind transdisciplinarity, to understand better behind this diversity what is at stake in terms of epistemology, in terms of practices, in terms of power symmetries among our scientific communities as well. So we will look at that, remembering that somehow transdisciplinarity emerged as a way to address the fragmentation in our communities, the fragmentation across disciplines on the one hand, but also as a way to ensure a better provision of knowledge and solutions from the scientific community to decision making. So right from the beginning, there were these two angles: the fragmentation in academic communities and the need to design new types of solutions to weak problems. So somehow it is complementary to a goal-oriented knowledge generation. Complementary in the sense that the two main motivations were this one. And we will try to keep that in mind, because it's not just this talk today, but it's a red thread of talks that we are trying to organize. And on 20th of October, we will organize another one, which will focus much more on the knowledge brokerage at the science society interface. So there is a continuum between looking at transdisciplinarity and looking at science society interface. So today we will try to gather some elements and to somehow build on elements, remembering that to build on elements about the role of scientists in working with other actors and producing socially relevant research and influencing policy or decisions or decisions to be shorter. So we also know that transdisciplinarity has emerged because of those motivations, but then has gained quite attention and momentum in those last decades as a new approach to research and to education, raising a lot of questions, issues, concerns, but appearing much more, each time more in our calls for projects, our call for proposals. We have to be transdisciplinary. This is an injunction, and there is quite a lot of pressure from all environment to get that. But yet, transdisciplinary is defined in very different ways, whether be it inter, multi, trans, and there are quite a lot of issues on that. So this is what we will look at today. This diversity, interpreting this diversity and interpreting how this diversity has consequences for the interface of society. But this will be the articulation of this next seminar, next talk. So for that, we have the great honor and pleasure to also to get Audrine Rennes online. Thank you, Audrine. Is the scientific director for the Institute of Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam in Germany. And he will tell us more about concepts, about practices, about pitfalls as well, about those approaches. And we approach Audrine Rennes, we didn't know each other before, but we approached him because he published a very interesting and important article last year in a journal which is Futures, with a S. And about the title of the article is Transdisciplinarity, Synthesis Towards a Modular Approach. And this will be our entry point this morning. Then we will, so he will present during half an hour. Then we will have a discussion, then coffee break, and then we are delighted that and this is the spirit of these talks, now you understood it, that we will confront, challenge, and discuss with the light of selected experience of 3 scientists here in the Montpellier community who will organize this rendezvous. We have the name, I'm not one of them, with the name here of our 3 colleagues. And then this will be the next round of our talk. And then we will benefit, and we are very fortunate, we will benefit from the last word of Carlos Alvarez Pereira. I'm very happy that Carlos would come from Madrid. Carlos is the vice president of the Club de Rome. Club de Rome is for those younger. I don't know if you know that, but in 1972, Club de Rome was the first to launch a big report on alta la croissance and limits to growth in English. and who has been in training the panorama at the international level about sustainability and about growth and degrowth. Carlos Carlos also came to participate to Le Monde Nouveau here, that is taking place in Montpellier. So we are very happy that we will have the floor at the end. Exactly, we have the good news that we have not so many people here is that we will engage in a very lively discussion. Exactly when we have disclosed MAK'IT center. So we are more or less 30, 40 here. This is a good number to engage in dialogue and have a very lively discussion. So please don't be shy. We want to do it. This is the way we do that. So I will leave the floor to Antoine Rennes. So I said he's the scientific director of IAS, and which is a great institute for advanced studies. He has a PhD in social psychology of the University of Cologne in Germany. He is also professor for technology assessment and environment sociology at the University of Potsdam and adjunct professor for integrated risk analysis at Stavanger University in Norway. And he's an affiliate professor for risk governance at Beijing Normal University. He co-directs the non-profit company Geologic, which is a research institute for the investigation of communication and participation processes. And he is engaged in multiple commissions and boards, including SAPEA, the Science Advice and Policy of the European Academies of Science. So, well, there was probably nobody better than Audrey to introduce this discussion on the diversity of transdisciplinarity, its roots, its practices, its pitfalls. Thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much first for this very kind introduction. I hope you can understand me very well. Just make sure that my voice is being heard. I'll be very delighted to be here. Unfortunately, I can only be here virtually and not physically, but I hope I can still have a very good conversation with all of you, because as it was pointed out before, transdisciplinarity is really alive when we have been engaged in a dialogue. So
yeah, we hear you perfectly.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Good to know. That's great. Okay, so my topic will be on transdisciplinarity. I will talk a little bit what it is, but also what it will do specifically in terms of giving advice to policymakers, but also giving advice to the general public or to stakeholders in society. And I would like to start out with a distinction between disciplinary, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary. So we have all these different terms, and they all have very clear definitions. However, as we've just heard, those definitions are not, universal. They have, differences. But I think the main aspects is the degree of integration. The disciplinary work or disciplinary science integrates the science or the research within one special field of studies. So, for example, sociology or physics or chemistry. And then everybody who's working on chemistry or working in the field of sociology, they do disciplinary studies, have their own methodology, their own theories, their own concepts, and based on these foundations that can come to do some, very useful research. Many phenomena just are not only or cannot be confined to one discipline in itself. So the next step is multidisciplinarity. Multidisciplinarity means that different disciplines approach the same phenomenon with their own methods, with their own concepts, but then at the end try to find a kind of a common denominator. So it's like an additive volume where you have chapter 1, X looked by a chemist, X looked by a physicist, X looked by a sociologist, and then in the end, what did we learn? It's not really integration, it's much more juxtaposition of different disciplines. The third one is interdisciplinarity. And interdisciplinary means that we're trying to have a common platform for different disciplines looking at the same phenomenon or the same set of relationships. And that kind of interdisciplinarity, of course, is already very ambitious, because very often we have to find common methods that would bridge one discipline and the other, and that we have maybe even common theoretical concepts that are including the various approaches from each individual discipline. And that, I think, is important. So interdisciplinary is already a major step forward. So if you look at specific phenomena like climate change, so we'll see, we have now integrated models that include social scientists, meteorologists, physicists, chemists, maybe policy scientists, and they all develop an integrated model about how things will develop over the next decades, given different scenarios of interventions. And the last one, and that's what I will focus on in the future, is transdisciplinarity. And transdisciplinarity basically means that, the word is beyond disciplinary work. And what it actually means is that in addition to scientific knowledge that we all integrate in interdisciplinary studies, we also in transdisciplinary studies include knowledge from other sources. That is the main point, and that's common to all transdisciplinary concepts in the world. That is, next to scientific, systematic knowledge, analytic knowledge, we need other types of knowledges that help us to really understand the phenomenon, but even more so, to design the solution space in which we can find solutions specifically for complex, wicked problems. And transdisciplinarity, so, is always integrating different types of knowledge in order to progress in a better, more thorough, more robust understanding of a phenomenon, and also in seeing what kind of solutions are possible or feasible, given that we have multiple actors, multiple stakeholders, multiple arenas in which that specific phenomenon is discussed. There are different schools of transdisciplinarity. I don't want to go too deeply into it. There's one school that really is saying that, it is a scientist that should collect that different types of knowledge, but there still are scientists trying to be systematic about non-scientific knowledge. There's a school that says, okay, we divide the world in practitioners and scientists, and we make sure that they are on equal footing, both sides, and that we have the practitioners and the scientists coming together, and that's a so-called Zurich School of Transdisciplinarity. And then the third school basically is, no, we don't want to exclude all different types of knowledge. It could be tested knowledge, could be local knowledge, it could be generic knowledge, intuitive knowledge. So all kinds of knowledge is extremely important in this, but science has the kind of the architectural role to make sure that all these knowledges can come together. So it is also a kind of a design task for science to make sure that other knowledge is integrated. Now, why do we need this? Well, one is, of course, to better understand very sophisticated relationships in the world. And the relationships in the world cannot be grasped by just one discipline, maybe not even by interdisciplinary work, because you also need the knowledge from experience. For how do people who live in that kind of relationships or are experiencing it, what kind of knowledge do they have? What have people knowledge that live next to, for example, whatever technical infrastructures, and they have specific, personal experiences with it. So all of that is important in order to understand, the kind of complex relationships that are between phenomena, but even more so to find maybe solutions if there is a problem. And so I would focus really on the objective of transdisciplinary science, which is basically to better understand phenomena, but also to give advice to those who have to make decisions. And I think that's a really important element here. Also your institute, just learned, is really looking into transformations, into transitions. Transitions are always triggered by intervention. So you have to be very sure what kind of interventions do you really want to release in order to make sure that the desired effect will actually become true. So policy advice at this point, or society advice, is usually disciplinary. So we have the Economic Council of Advisors, we have a Council of Advisors for Education. I don't know all about France, but some of them on risk management, on natural hazards. I mean, there are all kinds of advising committees, but they basically are disciplinary, or at best multidisciplinary. Very few are interdisciplinary, and I think there's very, very few ones that are really transdisciplinary. And I think what I would like to stress, and I'll go more deeply into this, that it needs to become more inter-transdisciplinary in order to be more effective. But it's not just effectiveness. When we look at policy advice, we basically think about four major objectives. It should be effective. So what the policy is supposed to do, it should do. And that's not trivial anymore in complex issues. Secondly, it should be efficient. So we don't want to waste resources, regardless what those resources are. Thirdly, it should be resilient. That's a new one. And of course, after the pandemic, we're very much aware that resilience is an important element for policymaking. And the fourth one, it should have to be socially just or fair, though that it doesn't put undue burden, let's say, on some parts of the population or increases inequality. So these are the kind of the four major objectives. Repeats them again because I think they're very important. So policies should be effective, doing what they're supposed to do, efficient, so it should be economical about resources. They should be resilient so that, even under stress, the system will still function, and they should be fair and socially just so that they can be socially acceptable. And so those are the kind of multidimensional evaluation, and that's a typical part of the transdisciplinary approach. There is a need for new transdisciplinary approaches to improve policy advice, and I would like to go a little bit into this. And of course, my publication Futures was already mentioned. That's basically based on that specific publication. When we talk about scientific input to policy making, and now I'm saying, what is the role of science in transdisciplinary research? We have said transdisciplinary research and discipline projects include more than scientific knowledge, but the issue is, so what is the role of science in all of this? And we have three major roles, and that is what, in my view, is really putting together a transdisciplinary context, which means, yes, we combine those three different scientific functions. The first one is analytical function, the second one is goal-oriented function, and the third one is catalytic function. And what does that mean? Well, firstly, science is needed for a very classic, curiosity-driven, methodologically robust, operational, analytic research. So we need to know what happens if we do what is going to happen. So if you want to think about effectiveness, we really need this kind of analytic knowledge. So if I increase the tax on gas, what will happen? If I, send big weapons to the Ukraine, what is likely to happen? If I introduce a cap on prices on oil, what is going to happen in the economy for the people? Is it fair? So all these issues, and that, of course, is certainly a question that very difficult to answer very often, but we need good analytic skills in order to make sure we understand cause-effect relationships. Now, we're all aware that it's not linear anymore, that we have complex relationships, that these kinds of analytic exercises may not give us a full answer, a lot of uncertainties, and that I think is very important to stress, a lot of ambiguities in there, but it's still necessary not to replace good analytic knowledge by intuition, because in complex issues, intuition normally is not very good. The second big aspect that science can offer is what we call goal-oriented investigation. And that is that we say, okay, society has a specific goal, for example, to decarbonize its economy until the year, let's say, 2050. Now, what we ask the scientists to do is to say, well, what are the means, the options, the scenarios that help us reach that specific goal? And that's one part of the question. The second part of the question is, what kind of negative or positive side effects do we expect when we choose scenario A rather than scenario B? And so we have different options to reach a predefined goal, and we'll need to science to ask ourselves and to ask whatever the experts in the room. So what's going to happen first? Is it effective? Does it really reach the goal? Is it efficient? Or do we have other options that can reach the same goal by less means? Is it resilient? Do we find that as soon as we have another stress situation, the whole system blows up? And what are the distributional effects of this? Are people, are the poor people paying more than the rich people, or the other way around? Is it socially just? Is it equitable? So all these issues come up, and and this is goal-oriented research. A lot of ministries are really pushing for goal-oriented research. They have specific goals or specific objectives, and they ask science, how can we reach that objective and minimize the negative side effects? What we can see there, in let's say all these complex issues that we deal today, there's no one scenario that only is affiliated or affected with positive impacts. Though there's no dominant solution to whatever problem we have. It's very rare. Sometimes there is, but most of the times not. So we always end up with trade-offs. And that's very important, specifically in transdisciplinary settings, that we can say, well, if you take option A, we'll reach the goal, but on the expense of X, Y, Z. If we do option B, we may not reach the goal totally, but it does have less side effects. If we do option C, we even get the goal better than anybody else, but we have a lot of costs there and a lot of other side effects. So we need to have to balance the various goals, and in English language, we call them trade-offs. So we have to trade off one goal against the other. And that, of course, is a very difficult process. And science can help to illuminate these trade-offs. It can also help to identify them, but it cannot resolve them. And then, of course, that is one of the major arguments for transdisciplinary research, how to resolve trade-offs. And then, of course, and that's the third one, that's the new one, will be called the catalytic expertise of science. And that is the design process. What kind of processes can we design to make sure that this systematic knowledge that we just talked about, analytic and goal-oriented, is included into the discourse, not being driven out by fake news, though that it is evidence-based, but at the same time that we get good experiential knowledge inside, good tacit knowledge inside, and that we have a real rational discussion about how to resolve trade-offs. And why I call this science, I mean, this is more social science. Well, giving, that we have very complex decision-making structures in most countries, regardless whether democratic or autocratic. I mean, even autocratic countries, not just one person making the decision. We have, different institutions, we have different agencies, we have, division of labor. And in democratic countries, even more so, we have different due processes. We have federal systems, provinces, and the central government. So what we need to do is say, how can we design a process that will help us first to understand the phenomena better than we have done in the past, though we can see the trade-offs that we will have to face when we choose option A rather than B, and how we can include the preferences, the values, and the interests of different groups without sacrificing truth. That's a challenge, and that is where the catalytic knowledge is really very essential. And the catalytic knowledge is what we call is a knowledge that gives us a good architecture for discourse design. That's what it does. So it does give you an architecture for discourse design, and you can test it empirically. You can say, well, which one is better, which one is worse, what has worked in what context. It's very context driven, so it's different in France and maybe in Germany or in UK. But of course, some of the things are universal, but very few in that specific sense. Now, my basic idea is that these three elements are the kind of backbone of transdisciplinary approaches. So we need the input of analytic research to understand causal relationships, models, simulations, everything we think about in terms of, how do we know about what affects what. Secondly, we need the goal orientation investigations that help us to understand what are the conflicting goals and what are the best means to reach the goal that we really want to accomplish. And certainly, what is the best process to get there? And if you put all of the three together, and specifically with three, we also integrate, the other types of knowledge, then I think we have a very good transdisciplinary approach. Now, when we think about the functions of the science policy nexus, so doing all of this, it's also very important to know, what are policymakers demanding. So at this point, when I went back, this is what science can offer in a transdisciplinary setting. This is what are the demands from different policymakers, and these policymakers could be politicians, it could be people in economic enterprises, it could be NGOs, it doesn't make any difference, people who make decisions. And what we can see is there are basically six major functions of science policy. The first one is enlightenment, and that is where basically the first element of science input is very much needed, also more analytic, so informing policymakers about complex relationships. That is not trivial. Very often, also policymakers have wrong perceptions about things like, for example, climate change. I mean, a lot of people think a CO2 is a pollutant, and if most pollutants just stay in the air for a couple of days and then they're gone. Well, if you think about CO2, it's going to be there for centuries, and so if you stop polluting, it still will be out there for 100 years, several hundred years. So and just understanding those issues, I think it's important for policymakers in all fields, and that is where the enlightenment function come in. The second one is orientation. Where do we want to go? And a lot of policy advice has been given to the fact, what are the kind of goals? I mean, if you want to have a goal-oriented discourse, well, first have to specify what the goals are. Again, science can help very much to say, what is the impacts of different goals, of different objectives? Is it realistic to think about decarbonization until the year 2050? What will happen if we don't reach that goal? Or should we have it at 2040 or 2080? And that's a discourse about orientation. That is where also catalytic knowledge is really important, that we have a good process to think about this. So, how to design foresight processes, how to design horizon scanning. That's what the EU basically does. Very different methods really to define orientation. The third one is strategic planning. And strategic planning, of course, is basically based on the second part on science goal-oriented investigations, and you can see that we have politicians, decision makers in industry. Anyway, we don't want to have strategies. They want to say, okay, well, we now know what we want. We have a good understanding about what affects what, but now we want to know what can we do in order to get where we want to get, and that is where we have predefined goals. We'd have to elicit different strategies and different scenarios, how we can reach that, and we assess these different scenarios, because then we get trade-offs, and that, of course, we need to do orientation. And if you want to prioritize that, again, we need a good architecture for discourse. Co-creation is number 4. It's the one that is really highly related to transdisciplinary approaches, because it combines all three of them, specifically the catalytic part, in which you say, well, what we want to do is to do the enlightenment, the orientation, and the strategic planning together with the decision makers from the beginning. And that is, so if they have ownership over the process, then they also will, gain more confidence in the solutions, and they will probably be more, let's say, aligned or more willing to implement what they feel is necessary to do. And so a lot of institutes, just like ours, are developing a specific discourse architectures, discourse designs that help decision makers to be co-creator or co-designer of the solution. Not that the scientists say, okay, we have the problem here. This is the 3 solutions, select one, but rather than, look, this is the problem. This is where you want to go. Now, what if you are feeling what you want to do? Well, we'll tell you whether it works or doesn't work. And now we have an iterative dialogue. And then in the end, everybody feels, okay, now we have a joint solution. And that, of course, makes it much easier to implement. The integration function is something which is very close related to co-creation, bringing these various forms of knowledge, in a sense, scientific, experiential, anecdotal, local, place-based, indigenous knowledge into a Korean framework. Very clearly, it is this 3 catalytic aspect, and one that that needs a kind of architect or conductor. Sometimes also like the analogy of a conductor. You have a lot of different musical instruments. If they all play together, it's a cacophony, so you don't like to listen to that, or it's very modern music. But normally the conductor makes sure that everybody plays the tunes that they can do best, and then of course you get very good music in the end. And the last one is monitoring, something that's very often forgotten, because when I said effectiveness is not trivial, in complex situations, it's not quite clear what is effective. Well, we can see that a lot of good intentional policies do not produce what they promise to produce. And that's in the energy fields, that's in the sustainability field, and different fields where everything we have complex relationships. Very often we think we do the right thing, but it turns out to be the wrong thing. And that politicians don't like that at all, because they made all the persuasive power to get people behind them to say, okay, when we do this and when we raise taxes on this will actually get better. It gets worse, and of course the politician is blamed, so they just want to get away from that and start with a new policy. But I think it's extremely important, because we learn from this. And if it's a complex situation, anticipating everything is difficult. So, we learn from mistakes, and that's good if we also have, scientists or experts that monitor what's going on and understand, look, yeah, we thought that was the right way, but it isn't. And we need to correct it. And I think that's fairly obvious. So what are the functions now? And this is, again, just a little bit of a summary of what I've just said. Policymakers demand scientific assistance support, and they need it in all these fields. And sometimes it's consecutive, that they first want to know more about the problems of enlightenment, then they want to know, yeah, what should I do? I mean, what is, what are the goals? Then look at the strategy, then to see that we can co-create solutions, and then monitoring them in the end. What is important there is that each of these different functions demand different architectures for discourse. And that is why discourse design is a science and not just an art. So we have to find out which kind of discourse composition is best suited for what kind of policy advice. So if it's enlightenment, well, it doesn't make much sense to have a lot of interest groups here, because, they just want to press their interest into a debate. Enlightenment is really understanding the functional relationships or the causal relationship between phenomena. That is very good if you keep it to, really good experts that know about it. It is very different if you talk about strategy. You need a lot of experiential knowledge to find out whether strategies work or not. So what are the different actors doing? What does intent to do? Do they counteract what you actually want them to do? So that is where you need a lot of discourse between stakeholders and policymakers. So you need different discourse combinations in order to implement any of these different functions. And I think that's very often a problem, because in the reality, we have one kind of format. Mostly there are scientific advisory committees, and they do all these functions at the same time, sometimes even not differentiating between them, and then talk somehow to politicians or write a report and send it to the politicians. And again, that is not very functional in the end. If you think about sustainability, we see that, we see a lot of combinations there. They may start basically as epistemic discourses and they lead to more orientation where you want to go. Then we need to find out strategies, and they may end up in exercises in co-creation. I've mentioned that before. Sorry. Oh, sorry, there's something wrong here. Yeah, so I would, like then to turn over to the second part of my talk. So give us some more, let's say, empirical insights, and then I would end with some open questions that we could use for the discussion. The first insight is, and I've already mentioned that, is scientific advice needs to overcome the traditional concept of truth speak to power. Well, that is something that scientists like. Sometimes even politicians like this because they can blame the scientists if something doesn't work. And we see that all the time, that politicians say, oh, yes, we see that it doesn't work, but, I base this on the best science and the best experts. They told me this. If the experts are wrong, what can I do? And the expert likes this model because, they feel they are responsible for the truth. And so, they can get out and say, we are the truth finders. And if you ignore us, you ignore the facts. Well, it's an easy, blaming game, but it's not very effective. And it's certainly not functional. And what we can see at first, the truth is much more colorful than, the truth and the falsehood. And secondly, power is not just power of politics. We have, a power within the discourse, which is, who really defines the claims and, who defines what is important and not. All of that is power. And I think we need to be more differentiated on both sides, on the truth side as well as on the power side. The transdisciplinary nature of science needs the input of other knowledge groups. I mentioned that clearly, but the real problem is that you should not compromise the methodological rigor of scientific inquiry. So very often we see transdisciplinary exercises is that interest groups come in, and of course they want to push their interest, and that's absolutely legitimate. I mean, that's why they're interest groups. However, if there's a conflict between interest and truth, so be it very, on a very simple method, well, interest will win. I mean, they will say, okay, we bend the truth in order to serve our interest. Now, if you have a discourse with them, now suddenly you have millions of truth claims, and many of them are colored by interest. So how do you filter them out? So in terms of co-creation, that's a big problem. So we have to find a method to say, look, guys, there are factual questions where, interest should not have anything to say, but experiential knowledge is important, because very often if you talk about, let's say, nuclear safety, it's very good not only to look into the systematic statistical analysis, but also what operators say about, what is a challenge for them when they deal with emergencies in a nuclear power plant. So we have to combine this. But of course, if you ask the nuclear industry, they will say, oh, there's no problem. If you ask Greenpeace, they say, oh, there's a problem every day. And so we need to make sure that, we can distinguish between interest-driven truth claims and, let's say, insight-driven truth claims. And that, again, is an issue of architecture. It's an issue of how to design it, that this kind of distinction really becomes effective. And we've looked at many of these discourses all over Europe, also in Germany and other countries. We very often find if interest groups drive the kind of fact-finding exercise, then we're lost. Then we will find out that everything is true, everything speaks for everything, everything is constructed. That doesn't work, and it doesn't help really policymakers if you have that kind of confusion about what's true and what is what is interest driven. The proposed taxonomy of discourses can serve as a guideline. they must be specifically clear, when do we need the analytic part of it? And when we do these discourses, we say, okay, look, guys, write down the questions that you have about the issue. Where do you feel we don't have a knowledge gap? Where do you feel we don't know that there's contested sites? Where do you feel that you believe it's true, but you still want to check it? And then we can go back to the best analytic scientists and say, look, guys, those are the open questions. And they may come back and say, we don't have an answer to this, or we have an answer, but it's very uncertain, which is good. I mean, don't play certainty out where it's not there. But it's a very good exercise to do that, to go back and to say, what do we actually know? What is robust knowledge in this? Where do we have a lot of speculations? And where do we have maybe good hints, but we're not sure about it? So it's very important, specifically in the beginning, and then to think about goals and to say, what do we want to accomplish? And very often that's not clear in policy advice. People just say, oh, we have a problem. We don't know, where do we want to go to? It's not just problem solution. It's, what you would like to accomplish, benchmarking, whatever it is. And then, of course, if you have agreement on that, then we can have the strategic component coming in to say, how do you reach that goal? And again, we can ask a specific scientist that can work on this. Again, that's normally always interdisciplinary. And then at the end, we say, okay, well, we have now different strategies. We can see there's the trade-offs, and then we deal with all the different other groups and saying, do you experience these trade-offs? Do you know them? Do we have ideas of how to resolve these trade-offs or how to address them? And that's extremely productive, because otherwise people will not buy into the solution if they feel, yes, well, we have all the negative impacts. Well, that's us, and the others have all the benefits, so forget it. So in that sense, it's extremely important to have these kind of trade-off discussions. And so we have general principles like transparency, openness, independence, common good orientation. I mean, that's given. But I think, again, those 4 objectives that I said at the beginning: is it effective? Is it efficient? Is it resilient? Is it fair? And now, there may be other objectives, but those are the 4 that are mainly important in any of these kind of discussions. And each function needs its own combination of analytical, oriented, and catalytic scientific input. So I would like to close with some open questions, and then I'm very happy to, have your discussion points, because I think, if we preach discourse, we should also exercise discourse. Empirical evidence on the actual interaction of science and politics, formal and informal, is sparse. I mean, we've done for the European Community 2019, a big Sapir report on scientific advice to policymaking. We made a big, literature review of something like 2,000 literature sources. In the end, it showed, well, there's a lot of conceptual things, there are a lot of anecdotal things, there are quite a few case studies, very little systematic empirical evidence on the actual interaction there. So our knowledge is still limited, to make sure that. Specifically, if it talks about the interactions between experts, stakeholders, policymakers, and the various publics. I mean, the affected publics, general public, the media, whatever. Those are representative of various public audiences. So sustainability policy is a valuable field of inquiry here in terms of where do you want to go. And so the 2 questions that I would like to raise in the end is, how is science processed in designing policies that transform societies to become more sustainable? So there's the issue basically as well, that goal that we want to keep. Well, sustainable is a big goal, and we need to, make it more tangible in terms of different sub-goals. But how do we use at this point science and scientific inquiry and different interdisciplinary modes in science consultations and scientific advice? And do we really design policies that have the potential to transform societies? And the second question is, and I mentioned that already, how can we really succeed in integrating knowledge, interest, values, and preferences? Those are the things that we always have in discourse. We have knowledge claims, we have interest. People say, well, it suits me, or I have more utility when I do X rather than Y. We have values, what people think is good or bad. Improving the environment is good, polluting is bad, regardless whether it has an impact on myself. And of course, preferences that, then people, have specific preferences, or some countries have preferences over others. And you have to combine them in that kind of transdisciplinary setting. How can you do this in a way that you do not sacrifice good knowledge, so that you don't violate basic principles of scientific insights, but at the same time honor the variety of different knowledge types, different interests, values, and preferences. So this is the end of my talk, and I'm really looking forward to the questions and comments, and thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm here so that you can. Okay. I'm not very familiar with reading my dimension type of setting. Thank you very much, Otwin. That was just fascinating, and that resonates very much with what MAK'IT aims at or would like to look like. Was first of all with the K of MAK'IT, knowledge rather than just science, evidence, expertise, and those your three pillars, analytical research. This is why we try to bring together scientists from different disciplines, goal-oriented investigation. This is why we really focus on transition and contribution to transition, and catalytic expertise. This is why we focus on mediation and controversy. So this very much resonates with our DNA. And I'm stopping. I have many questions, but I'm stopping here just to let the audience interact with you. Maybe we can privilege different questions and remarks, unless there is only one, and then you react to all of them, rather than just a question and answer session. So please, if you would like to interact and to comment and to observe or to questions or to take advantage of this presentation, then we will go for a coffee break and go into the next session. Yes, Viviana, please raise your hand so that I can just start trying to mention business. Viviana, who else the first would like to? Well, yes, Brian, Viviana, maybe if you could just introduce yourself very quickly, and you have the floor, say who you are and why you are talking about. Viviana. Maybe you have to speak loud. No, don't stand up and speak loud. So that Otwin can hear you.
I couldn't hear it right now. Maybe you can repeat it, because otherwise, if it's in the back, unfortunately, I can't hear it.
Okay. Would you mind coming here? Good.
Where?
Yeah. It's okay. And with the audience around.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this excellent conference, because it explains very clearly the difference between multidisciplinarity, inter and transdisciplinarity. Well, my name is Viviana Bilbao. I am from the University Simón Bolívar in Caracas, Venezuela. My area of knowledge, I am originally ecologist, but now I'm working trying to implement inter and transdisciplinarity, integrating traditional indigenous knowledge and different systems of knowledge to create new policies of fire management in Latin America. I am part of the MAK'IT program for this year. I'm very happy with this. My question is and comment related with this topic, and in my experiences, we try to create a new integrated fire management with an intercultural vision, integrating knowledge from indigenous communities and policymakers, firefighters, and of course scientists. And we are a team that's trying to facilitate platforms to create a truth environment. But the problem is how to overcome the historic problem of the dominant discourses, because the dominant discourse is to eliminate any type of fires, even the indigenous practices, and the firefighting is to suppress suppression. And there are a lot of resources, and usually, historically, they ignore the traditional practices. So how to create this the integration to involve the policymaker and try to reduce the dominant discourses to create a more equitable environment in your experience? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Viviana. If you allow, offering there are other hands. So
Yeah, please. Yeah, I can answer this all together at the end. Yeah.
Yes, that would be Ryan.
Hi, Dr. Ren. Can you hear me from here?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Because I'm kind of locked in here, so I'll throw my question out from the left field bleachers here. Thank you so much for this really thought-provoking presentation. My name is Brian Gaudive. I'm a professor at the University of San Francisco, and I work on the politics of knowledge production, particularly as it relates to biotechnologies. Specifically agricultural biotechnologies in Africa. And so I guess the question that I wanted to pose to you was specifically, a lot of your presentation worked around this idea of the science policy making interface. And it spoke about, to quote, evidence-informed policy making, which creates analytical ideas based on methodological rigor. And so in the topics that I orbit around, there are lots of epistemological and methodological debates about what makes good knowledge or useful scientific, within the scientific community, what makes useful scientific understandings about agricultural biotechnologies. And I was wondering whether and how the rubric that you were developing here is useful towards parsing and thinking through some of those epistemological and methodological differences within the scientific community.
Don't be shy if there are other ones. Well, you may begin with these two answers or twin.
Yeah, I can do this, and if people pop up again, that's great. Well, thank you very much, sir. First, Viviana, for pointing out, all of this, of course, is based on the goodwill of people to engage in such a discourse. And of course, if you have a lot of power play, I mean, the powerful people will say, well, what's in there for me, and if they feel they can lose power, then it probably have more opposition. And that we face that very often, that more powerful actors say, why should I go in a discourse and reduce my impact that I normally have in order to maybe give in for others that is not in my interest. And so that's an issue that comes up very often. And if you have the countries in which that kind of power play have even a stronger impact on society, it's even more difficult. So one of the things, there are two ways to do this. One is to challenge power, which is get public pressure, getting NGOs up and so on, so that the powerful in the end say, okay, well, we better give in because otherwise we have trouble. The other one is the more diplomatic way to say, look, the powerful people, if you want to keep some kind of control, you better they have more participation, because otherwise you will face all that of kind of opposition that you may fear in the end. It's also a slippery road there. I mean, we are not going into a discourse that doesn't have a history. And history, of course, determines basically the roles and the functions of the different actors in there. And I think, as a sociologist, I'm very much aware that this is not a context-free world in which we operate. However, at least, in the European context in which I operated, I see it more and more that even the more powerful people really seem to understand that unless they engage in a more, let's say, structured discourse, they may lose power, or they may be not effective anymore. Power is also based on legitimization. Again, that of course is more democratic societies where people can lose power very easily if the electorate doesn't believe they can do it anymore. And we can see this right now, a big debate between the more authoritarian in quotation mark democratic regimes that just keep a majority for a leader, and the leader can do whatever he or she wants, or the, let's say, the institutional democratic structures in which we have a due process, in which people are heard and also taken seriously. And of course, to design discourses, you have to know the context in which you operate, and that may be different in Venezuela than in France than in Germany or in China. And I've worked a lot in China and seen that on the sub-political structure, there's a lot of freedom. As soon as you get to the political structure, forget it. I mean, there's no way you can get a discourse. So in that sense, yes, it's very important to understand the situation, the context, and to see where do we have freedom in order to design such a discourse. And sometimes it's very constrained, and I totally agree with that. Sometimes it's not. And very often when we talk, I mean, I've worked in Peru a little bit, also with indigenous knowledge on water supply and otherwise. What was convincing was when they said, okay, look, these indigenous knowledge has evolved over hundreds of years and turn out to be fairly functional in the various contexts. Why don't you use that knowledge? It's also to your advantage if you do that. And then, of course, people say, hey, yeah, well, maybe. And you get maybe a change of attitude there. But it's an uphill battle. I absolutely agree. And it's not that we have a recipe of doing this. We have to see what is possible within what kind of context. And that leads me to the question of Ryan. I think, thank you very much. I think it's very important. It's an important topic that I haven't touched upon much. What is good analytic science in a world of very complex, wicked problems? And we have, epistemic debates. We have different models that compete with each other. And the question is, which one is, has more whatever functionality than the others. We don't want to say which is, has more affiliation to truth, but it's something where we can see, what does work in a more experimental field, and also, what do we consider in these models and what do we not consider in this model? And very often when you do this kind of epistemic discourses, that's something that at least I felt was very helpful to say, okay, what does your model exclude? And that, first question you think, well, what a strange question. We always want does it include? Well, I said, well, great that it includes a lot. I want to know what it excludes. What is not in there? What is not considered? And then if you have different models, you can suddenly feel, the difference between the models is because this model excludes whatever economic growth or whatever. The other one excludes people's preferences. The third one excludes whatever. And then, of course, you have, contesting evidence. I mean, biotechnology, you have, different data sets that give different inferences about, conclusions. We have worked very much with kind of Delphi methods to make sure, can we overcome these differences? Is it just semantic? Is it really empirical? Is it theoretical, and so on? That can also help to resolve some of these epistemic conflicts. What I would stress is if you have a strongly epistemic debate, it's very good to keep interest groups fairly out of this game because they tend, of course, to select the model that they like most. And they find millions of arguments why that model is better than the others. And you get a very strange discourse, and it's much more which model serves my needs more than others, and then that doesn't help very much to decipher, what is more functional than the others. So in that sense, I'm really focusing on a strongly epistemic discourse with consensus conferencing, with Delphi methods, with cost impact balance analysis. There are all kind of methods that help to find a scientific consensus or a dissent. Both is possible, but then I know the reasons why these different positions have dissenting views.
I think it's Sarah, you'd like Sarah will add one comment, and then we will, I don't see other hands, I will just say a very short word, and then we will break.
Hi, Robin. Yes, thank you very much for your talk. Very illuminating. I'm Sarah Guinness, scientific officer here at MAK'IT. And now we are facing many pressing issues, and we have this idea that decision has to be taken very quickly. And this somehow privilege a linear approach to scientific advice and to policy decision making, opposed to what it is a construction approach based on transdisciplinarity. So my specific question is how we balance this idea that transdisciplinarity take very long time to give anything. Are there any advice? I know you are very implicated in this, not only from the institute, but also from dialogic. So is there any kind of training advice we can take to try to foster transdisciplinarity into decision making, leaving behind this excuse of that is time consuming?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very important question. And we've seen this in the pandemic crisis. I mean, if you have a pandemic, people expect policymakers to make decisions within hours. And you cannot start a transdisciplinary discourse and saying, look, people are dying in the streets. Well, just wait until we have a wonderful discourse and we get all the epidemiology being settled first. And then we look into interests and values and so on and so on. And then we make the decisions in 5 weeks. I mean, all the government in the world would probably vanish and being thrown out of office if they would take that route. So the only thing you can do in terms of crisis is to be prepared for crisis. And I think that's something that I would also see as a major lesson from the pandemics, is to say, what we've done in all countries more or less was when the crisis came, we collected all the knowledge from virologists. And basically that was it. And then, of course, yes, that was important in the beginning, but then we found out we had a lot of conflicting goals. I mean, the educational system suffered, people, had more domestic violence, we had businesses that went bankrupt, and so on and so on and so on. So there is also multiple goals, and we had to have trade-offs, but in the beginning of the crisis, nobody was willing to think about trade-offs. And so in that sense, I think it's very important before the crisis occurs that you have a body of advisors that represent different disciplines, different interests, different knowledge, that you exercise with them. If a crisis is coming, how can we still get quick decisions in that kind of multi-level body, so that different concerns are really also included in the advice. And that is something that you have to arrange ahead of time. So it's a kind of a contingency planning board. And that's something I think what was missing in most countries. Korea had one, and that's why they were very quick in doing very good things. But most European countries didn't have it, US also. So you had a vigilance board for infections, but you didn't have one for all the side effects. So my major lesson out of the infection is please prepare for the next crisis. Maybe it's not an infection, maybe something totally different, as we've seen now, Ukraine or something else. To have a board of people that represent different disciplines, different perspectives, different value systems, and different interests, and exercise with them. I mean, that's important. So if the crisis is coming, these people know their roles and they can act quickly. And I think that's something where I feel we can progress much better if you do that rather than waiting for the crisis to come and then have ad hoc committees coming up and then take time for them to work together. And very often then the politicians are frustrated and do whatever they feel is necessary.
Thank you very much, Audrey. This is an invitation to invite you again when we will deal specifically about crisis. We began last year with the conference, and we will host a cohort of scientists who they will arrive on 1st of January to work specifically on this issue of what's the role of science and scientists in times of crisis. But we will thank you so much for this very exciting discussion with so much humility and rigor. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your investment. We don't have time to discuss what I will say, but I was wondering whether we could not have one seventh function in the interface, although it's probably a cross-cutting one, and it might be included in your fourth one about co-design. It's about mediation as a catalytic role of expertise, how to bring different views and values together in order to make sure that knowledge can contribute to transition. But that might be a MAK'IT bias to formulate it this way. Well, we'll keep that for further discussion. We go for coffee break. A very short one, please. 5 minutes just to stick the legs and the short breaks, and we come back, and I'm quite sure that already Dimitri and Adeline will comment again on that. And of course, we would like to share all those comments with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your attention, and I'm very happy to be back again. And if you have any more questions to me, you can also send me an email. Also, for those who have not dared to ask a question this morning, I'm very happy to whatever entertain your questions at a later stage. Thank you very much.
Okay. Merci, Patrick. So now I propose that we move to what's happening for Montpellier in terms of the transdisciplinary approaches. So my name is Marielle Chomel. I'm the project manager, and I have the honor to moderate this panel. So we have 3 experienced researchers from Montpellier today. Adeline Barnaud, who is an agronomist from the French Research Institute for Development, IRD. She's attached to the Joint Research Unit DIAD, which means that's for our fellows that you get the acronyms in head little by little. So diversity, adaptation, and development of plants. She's a specialist on crop evolution and adaptation to climate change, notably in Africa, through a multi-stakeholder approach. We have also with us Aurélie Bruno. She's an anthropologist and agronomist from CIRAD, the French Agricultural Research and Cooperation Organization. She's attached to the Joint Research Unit ASTRE meaning Animal Health, Territories, Risks, Ecosystems. That's a big one. And she's specialist on One Health issues. She's also the co-director of the Maison des Sciences de l'Homme Sud here in Montpellier. And to finish, Dimitri, she's still there. So Dimitri has been trained in computer sciences and conservation planning. He is one of the recipients of the 2020 interdisciplinary thesis of the Doctoral College of the University of Montpellier. And he is now attached to the Joint Research Unit AMAP in Montpellier, Botany and Modeling of Plant Architecture and Vegetation. So thank you very much for being with us today. We were supposed to have also Olivier Barreto on water issues on this panel today. Olivier is the Deputy Director of the Montpellier UNESCO International Center on Water. But he had a last-minute family issue, so he sent his apologies, and we hope to have him in other seminars in the year. So, first of all, I would just like to ask you to react to what you just heard from Altwin, and maybe insisting on what brought you to transdisciplinarity in your personal background, so that we know you a bit better and how you apply or not what Altwin just presented. I don't know who wants to start. Adeline?
Oh, yes, I can start. So thanks very much for inviting me to this roundtable and this conference, and thanks Altwin for your brilliant talk. I mean, that really resonates with my experience, and especially your last question about how to combine different knowledges, sources, and different values. It's more or less at the heart of what brought me to transdisciplinarity. As an agronomist and population geneticist, I've been fortunate to work since my PhD in interaction with social scientists. And this interdisciplinary background really helped me to go through transdisciplinary. Indeed, when we commonly share a research object, so we need to elaborate common languages, we need to co-construct research questions, we need to share and confront a research protocol in an interdisciplinary project. All this dynamic of collaboration allow us to really understand how rich is it to have a diversity of view, and how much it helps us to really answer research questions. And all these practices of interdisciplinary kind of involve disciplinarity. Indeed, my colleagues in social science really helped me to understand the diverse value of agrobiodiversity that could be embedded in local farming communities. My research object is agrobiodiversity, which is a shared object between scientists, geneticists, for example, we might need to develop new varieties, but also for farmers. It's a seed for them, and but also for the diversity of farmers. And working with social scientists, it's really important to understand that dividing can be in touch to this biodiversity, and that we need to take this in consideration. And it was also said by recently by the Anti-Best report that we need the recognition of that value to as the first condition for effectiveness of environmental policies. So there is a direct link between understanding the diversity and what we can do as policies. And maybe the second element that really led me to transdisciplinarity is kind of a progressive awareness of the role that the researcher has to play in face of all the issue of invasion of biodiversity or climate change. And the issue cannot be discussed only among scientists. The complexity and diversity of the challenges require to engage all stakeholders and to kind of stimulate our collective intelligence toward questions that is not only about, for me, about finding the right decision, the right solution, and it was stressed also by the talk. It's about ensuring that we have a sustainable and a fair and just future for all, and we are all touched, and for that we need to engage in transdisciplinarity. That's how I see it.
Okay, thank you. Really, would you like to present us your very original professional background and how we got in?
Yes. So actually, I did not come to transdisciplinary first, but as a social scientist, but with a background in agronomy, so in a double, let's say, field of expertise in nature science and social science. I was recruited to be engaged in conservation, wildlife conservation program, research program, and it was a bit confusing first if I was expected for providing what Finland called enlightenment as a social scientist contributing to an interdisciplinary process. But quickly I understood that I was supposed to be the architect of co-creation. And it was really confusing. So I came to transdisciplinary, acknowledging the fact that interdisciplinary process was not flowing from itself, that it needed to be really accompanied with a facilitation method for integration, but also that only with the field of conservation, wildlife conservation, for example, the other water or agrobiodiversity or else, we cannot really address this competition with our stakeholders. But what was fascinating but quite difficult sometimes is that in the academic community, this need for facilitation and for let's say the skills for co-creation, for intermediation, mediation, etc., were not 20 years ago when I was were not really explicit. So what was explicit was we need interdisciplinary process and we need social scientists with us. In the conception, maybe rather than multidisciplinary rather than interdisciplinary, but regarding the challenge linked to our research field about wildlife conservation, multidisciplinary was really not enough. So we had to go, the team had to go beyond this, and we took the way through transdisciplinarity, but without really knowing it and making it clear. And through times after that, it became very obvious that we had to claim about transdisciplinary process and to acknowledge it for research donors, for policymakers, and also within the research community. Because until now, I still, as a scientist involved in that kind of process, feel that this confusion remains between the social scientists providing enlightenment and documenting social facts that are needed to be taken into account for the decision process, but on the same time, who is facilitating all this complex transdisciplinary process? It comes on social scientists most of the time, but it is not the same job to facilitate the process or to provide social science facts to enlighten the decision. But this is very, very interesting anyway. But I really liked listening to Owen is really like feeling like being at home, and it is it seems so easy and clear and so relevant when it's presented like that. But still, I think that maybe out of this MAK'IT Institute, it is still very difficult to really acknowledge that kind of framework in the field of research. Maybe not all over the world, but here it is still challenging.
I find it really interesting, this difference between the role of scientists as provider of knowledge and scientists as facilitator, and maybe we can ask whether this is only for social scientists or if this applies also in others. Dimitri, would you like to give us a bit more insight on?
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for this brilliant presentation. I was very enthusiastic because I never really thought about am I doing transdisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, but everything was very enlightening for me in the presentation, and I was like, okay, I can connect it to these issues, etc. So I really liked it, and I realized that actually what brought me to inter and transdisciplinarity is like a succession of event and personal quest for finding something meaningful to do in my work. So as you said, I started as a computer scientist, and I was not really interested in doing computer science in the industry, in startups, etc. So I wanted to cross boundaries. So with boundaries, so I went to Africa, to Colombia, to New Caledonia, and also disciplinary boundaries. And from one experience to another, it progressively led me to I don't know, to become not a computer scientist, but computer science is like my technical skills, but I'm not involved in computer science projects. And it's only now with looking at these experiences that I realize that this is a whole that led me to transdisciplinarity. And now I realize that such kinds of presentation of studies are really interesting and important to better understand how do we practice our research and how can we improve it and how can we make it more relevant with the sustainability challenge that we have today.
This is something we were discussing before the conference, that actually many scientists are doing transdisciplinary work, but they don't know they are doing it, or they don't put the name on it. So that's interesting what you just say. I would like to ask you a second round of questions before opening the floor. More specific one this time, and if you can provide, as you did, short answers so that we can have this interaction at that. Aurélie, so the One Else context in which you are now operating, even if you are moving to other fields also, but you were operating on this One Else context, seems to me at least the perfect example of where transdisciplinarity could be concretely applied. But is it really the case? And what is your concrete experience in that regard? And can you give us examples?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, so One Else, just a few words to maybe situate what it is. It's about integrated approach to health, merging together issues rising from animal health, public health, environmental management, agriculture, and a lot of factors that may influence risk of emerging health issues. COVID-19 is one of these emerging issues. And really, that we need to work at the interface between health, agriculture, environment, animal health, human health, to understand all these complex issues and propose some solution. So, I worked on it first in the context of avian flu 10 years ago. And what was really amazing, and I agree with you, Marianne, it's a wonderful field for transdisciplinarity implementation, because to understand such issues like zoonotic disease emergence or resistance to antibiotics, it is so much multifactorial, so much complex that you need really to merge different type of knowledge from medical physicians, veterinarians, ecologists, health ecologists, sociologists, anthropologists, economists. You need to have the big picture to understand at the level of the socio-ecological system all the interactions between host pathogens and the environment that will lead maybe to the emergence of such problem, and what are also the levers for solutions, and how we can make the surveillance and also propose some measures for the control of that type of thing. So it is by essence multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary problem that we are addressing that needs integration, and we come back to this other dimension that Ortwin has pointed. One else is about how to integrate different knowledge. So as epidemiologists are key actors in One Else, we often rely on modeling process to do so. But what is really interesting in terms of transdisciplinary perspective is that to provide a relevant modeling process, only academics cannot be enough, because there is so much uncertainty that we also need to add in the modeling process what will come from experiential knowledge, so from the stakeholders, from the people at risk, and a lot of people whom practices may influence the trajectory of our socio-ecological system and the different drivers for emergence. So regarding One Health on the scientific and let's say experiential knowledge integration challenge, it is a wonderful field for exploring what transdisciplinarity can bring and how it can make the difference by really addressing this systemic approach totally. But beyond that, to be able to implement such modeling process and integration of different type of knowledge, there is a big challenge to be overcome. And this one is not a small one. It's about having the medical actors being from public health, medical physicians, or veterinarians, people from the Ministry of Health, of a lot of also bodies, international organization addressing health, having them on board and having them also accepting what Ortwin pointed also, the loss of power that may generate for them, because maybe especially health is a particularly specific field of action where specialists have really high valorized knowledge, very specific. But addressing One Health issues, this specific knowledge is not enough. For sure, we need other type of knowledge. So it's really also, we are talking about mediation and facilitation, is how we can bring these actors being in a more equitable relationship with others, sharing power, admitting other types of knowledge, and going all together, acting for common good, but then getting out of their field of expertise and accepting that this is not enough. And it's maybe one of the key process in terms of transdisciplinary process in itself and collective learning process. This is really key and very well illustrated through One Health. And I had something else to tell you, but I'm just finding. Yeah, it's yes, absolutely. Then once we can get all these people together in that type of process, and it is the case now, thanks to the pandemic we just went through, we can have a kind of community of practice, community of research, a set of experts or non-experts, but people sharing knowledge and being able to enlighten decision makers later. It was the last comment, I think, of Ortwin, just before the coffee break, is that we have to practice transdisciplinarity because it's not only in crisis time. It is not possible regarding time constraints. You cannot activate a transdisciplinary process like that because you need it in an emergency situation. It is really about having long-lasting transdisciplinary practice that will bring the setup of a community of practice with experts and with a lot of stakeholders that will be able maybe for the next crisis to activate collectively their intelligence and elaborating of what they have learned, sharing and integrating the different knowledge. And it is the case for One Health now because there is this One Health high-level expert panel that has been raised a few months ago. And these people are not only vets and medical doctors, neither only ecologists or wildlife specialists. We have agronomists, we have social scientists, we have a lot of people from associations, NGOs, etc. as well, policymakers from different backgrounds, and they all together share a lot of insights about One Health approach and knowledge, and also assessing what is nowadays the useful or reliable knowledge we can activate for decision making. So this is really a long-lasting process out of only crisis time.
So if I understand, one solution to this power imbalance that you were mentioning that can be actually an obstacle to transdisciplinarity could be the creation of such expert panels?
Yeah, but only creating it is not enough again because it cannot just come out of the hat like that. It's really about practicing. And I think we don't emphasizes this enough. It's really how we can, but also at university, involve the students, also training professors, teachers, a lot of people from different backgrounds to have this set of mind. It is really about a change of paradigm. You know, there's a big conference about the monde de demain. There is a lot of converging ideas now for this change of paradigm, but it is not only a huge philosophical change. It is very basically in our practice for a lot of even local, even at the level of the village here in France, changing the way we integrate knowledge, the reliable knowledge, and how we mobilize it to take decision. And it has to be really a long, flowing process, long-lasting process everywhere. I hope it was a
Yes. Turning to you, Adeline. So you have been involved in many multidisciplinary research projects in Africa, including agrobiodiversity, seed security, and farmers' resilience to climate change. So could you tell us what have been the innovation, the main features that you have that emerge actually from these research projects and these approaches, and how close have you come to the dimensions of transdisciplinarity that was presented by you?
That's, I mean, I would say that when it comes to agrobiodiversity or agronomy, it's or even a question of agriculture, it's more or less like a question of what else. It's a subject that needs integration, and as it was really well explained by Aurélie, it's a long-lasting process from multidisciplinarity that comes to interdisciplinarity, where everyone, when we start a community of practices, of researchers that learn how to work together, learn how to build common trust. I really think that something which is really important is a trust for a diversity of researcher and discipline, or a diversity of stakeholders to work together. Is that you have to trust other people, or researchers, other people hypotheses, other researcher discipline protocols, so that on this trust you can build new research questions, innovative protocols, and that's really something that emerged from our interdisciplinary project. And what emerged also is that it's a community that is going out of the project. You start within a project, and then other people join through another project or not. And this community, either interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary community, has to be fed to be able to, as you say, react quickly. And for your question, how we move slowly from interdisciplinarity to transdisciplinarity, it was step by step. Because I mean, it's not easy to go into transdisciplinarity, but I mean, I guess we don't have the choice. When you touch seeds, you meet farmers, you meet NGOs, you meet politicians. I mean, you meet policy. You meet people that are dealing issues that you have to talk with, that you have to present results, that you have to discuss your results with. So more or less, you don't have choice. The way you do it will change the way of how people can use the results, and how we can build the common questions. And more or less, we start by working with farmers in the fields, so taking into account what their knowledge and their values, and slowly inviting farmers and community, local stakeholders to our meeting. But that's not enough. Slowly, you have to, from the meeting, you have to go to the project, and that's where things become a bit more difficult. Because the collaboration between different stakeholders is really really interesting. Really, I mean, it's tells you a lot, but it's a challenge for both researcher, academics, and non-academic people. It's a challenge in every step. First, because as you already stated, there is a power relationships. There is feeling of for some of the people some injustice. For example, farmers toward research can feel some injustice of what was done. I mean, we are always working with them, but not always giving back as a result of our research, for instance. So all these make the work together quite challenging. And you have many other issues. Okay, let's say we work together, we are co-producing knowledges. So what are we doing with this knowledge? Are we publishing it? Okay, we publish it, we publish knowledge, we publish all this, and where are they, how we acknowledge the fact that farmers, we co-construct some knowledge with the farmers. Are we putting the local communities on our publication? How we you know, we have, if we receive funds from Europe, we need to go through fair and to publicly open our results. But for some of the results, farmers don't, I mean, some of our stakeholders we are collaborating with, they don't necessarily want that all the results to be publicly available. There might be issue if we work on ethnobotany, on sensitive traditional ecological knowledge. So all this collaboration is, I mean, it's really interesting, but we have to work on how we collaborate. And that's how I will also go to what you say about long-lasting collaboration. Is that we need to know how to work together. We need to build trust. We need to find practices of collaboration practices that are fair and just for all the stakeholders and academics. And all this take time to build. And it's not a 3 years project that allow to build such community. And also, I mean, we are not trained as a researcher. As a geneticist, when I had to talk with farmers, I mean, again, I was not trained to ethics, for instance, during my studies. And while it's all about ethics, so it's how we touch also to teaching and how we relate with the student in university. Transdisciplinarity is in the ground, how to build it, but it's also in the university, how to transmit it, and it's also to with the policymaker how to. So it's kind of it's a really interesting subject to think about and how to.
Yeah. It's a perfect transition. Thank you, Adeline, for the next question. I think it was about this training and how transdisciplinarity is actually involved in training, students training. Dimitri, I wanted to ask you what are the main challenges for a young researcher who would like to embrace these transdisciplinary approaches, and how do you think it can be valorized in a scientific career? Because, for instance, Adeline mentioned these publications coming out of it, but this is for scientists, but what is for other stakeholders? Is it really valorized or not in a scientific career?
First, I want to highlight the things that were said before and that will give some the main elements of my answer. It's first that transdisciplinarity is a long-lasting challenge, and that it became a necessity if we want to address the sustainability challenges. And it is true for organization, for the societies, but it is also true for individuals. And it begins with students. And as you just said, we are not really trained in the university to be transdisciplinary. We have multidisciplinary careers, but not transdisciplinary. And I would say that today the main challenges for a young researcher who want to embrace transdisciplinarity is having the time to build his own experiences, to feel what is transdisciplinarity, and also facing doubts, because you get out of your comfort zone. You have to as you just said, do things that you were not prepared to do. For me, for instance, my first experience was when I went working in Guinea in West Africa, and I had to work with pharmacists and doctors in their data management. And the only thing that I was doing in the university was like programming in front of the computer, so it was like something. And yeah, I think that's having out of your comfort zones experience with people from different cultures, different disciplines is a key element. And of course, it brings doubts because you don't know if you are legitimate to do this or to have this position and so on. So yeah, it's a long-lasting personal process, I think, when you begin in such a career. And how do you valorize that in scientific publication? Well, I think it's
Not only in scientific publication, but
in
in
the
your
career.
career,
Yeah. Well, I think it's
vis-à-vis your colleagues,
yeah.
your unit, the way the French research systems work.
First of all, I think it's very you can valorize it because you learn how to speak with people from other disciplines and other cultures, etc. But also it takes time to understand different languages, even with people from your own culture with the same language. It takes time to understand each other and to begin to have common problems and really be productive and creative together. So when you do this process, I think really it's much easier than to collaborate with people and to adapt to different contexts, to different cultures, to different disciplines. And after that, it was something that was highlighted in the presentation, is the creativity. You can be creative and you can not just try to do something that was done before and try to do it better. You can do things that are really original and are really creative, and I think it's the most valorizing things for your career, because if you can do that, you are kind you are more or less in a niche. And I think transdisciplinarity is about this. It's about creating new niche, mixing disciplines and cultures and together, and it's not like to compare with something that I know well. It's in research in pure computer science. People are studying the same problem for like decades, and they just want to, and get it a little bit better and so on. So there is a lot of competition because everyone tries to be the first to beat this problem, etc., etc. And I think when you get into transdisciplinarity, it's not about competing with people, but more collaborating and empowering each other to address new questions and to solve new problems.
Thank you. So if I understand well, it demands to take risks.
And
to go out of
one advice. One thing is like the system is today is like you go to the university, you do like you license, master, and then you PhD, and here it's 3 years, which is very short for this. So having experiences like the association or professional experiences between the master and between the PhD, I think it helps a lot to be prepared to integrate this when you start doing research in the PhD.
Thank you very much to the three of you. We are running a bit out of time, so I would like to open the floor and encourage really everybody to ask any question. We were talking about training programs for students. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'd like to know from the student level, how trying more. So in a university setting, if there's no funding, how do you approach people to say, okay, let's just maybe sit down and talk to see if we have on ground to make preventive measures in the future.
What is the starting point, if I understand well, especially if you have no funding, you want to do that to engage in transdisciplinarity, but how do you start? Maybe we can also collect other questions and do the same as before. Edward?
Yeah. When you look at rural development or any development process, you always come to the conclusion that you need to bring a lot of people into the process. Sociology, politicians, the market. And you also realize that it's not something you can do in 2 years or 1 year, that you need this to be like a continuous process. And then we have the projects and the cooperation that try to implement alignment projects that try to solve all these issues, bring all these people around. But when you move out of the development project or the cooperation agencies to and see what's happening in the governments, especially in the tropical region of the developing world, this is this disconnection that you got the politicians doing one thing and they don't want to know anything about the scientists. They don't want to bring them on board, or if they want, they don't have the mechanism to do it. So you have like two worlds happening at the same time. You got the scientists and the international community realizing that this needs to be done, but the practice in the country is completely different. So my question to you is, how do you see that this can be turned over? How can we change the dynamics outside the projects into the governments, into the real development processes that take place in any of these countries? When you have the situation that there is disconnection with the politicians, do we have to work on the politicians side? Because they are the ones who really can bring the scientists on board, not the other way around. Is it through education, or is it something else that we have to do to change the mind, as you said, in the setting, so that this can be sustained without external cooperation inside the international government?
Thank you. And a related question, as you have scientists that are more prone to engage in transdisciplinarity and others not, do you have the same on the policy side, some policymakers that are open to this practice in another way? Andrea.
Thank you. I think it's related to Laura's question. Well, you've been practicing interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity for a while, and as it's a very time-consuming activity, have you seen that institutions will value what you've done until now? Or I think so, right? Because you're still doing this, right? I believe that the way institutions measure scientific performance sometimes doesn't allow us to take the time to dialogue with others, to really see and try to understand other science, other disciplines, and even less other actors. So how do you think, or is there a way to change institutions in that sense?
We are talking about enlightenment here, and I will take an idea that I heard from Gary during the coffee break, and he was talking about accelerated programs to boost transdisciplinarity and engage participants in this as well, because he was make it as an example. How can we invite institutions to support transdisciplinarity? I think from your message as well, you have this kind of initiative. So do this play an important role, how we can strengthen these different initiatives to boost transdisciplinarity, to valorize the effort of this kind of approach?
I would like to close the round of questions for now. Maybe ask Dimitri if you can address the first question. You are a student, you are interested in these practices, open to work with other disciplines, other actors. you have no funding, no ideas where to go. What do you do?
When you are a student or when you are a teacher?
No.
As a student, I think the first thing is to look for internships that are challenging in disciplinary aspect. I mean, not trying to, I think it's maybe the first thing that I would advise, to try to find internships that are really out of the comfort zone, and that might lead you to try new things, to maybe exert your specialty, your skills, but with people that don't share the skills, so you can learn from them and they can learn from you, and also travel as much as you can. And if you are in a city like Montpellier, for instance, you are lucky to have the opportunity to see many conferences, presentation, and meet many people from many horizons, disciplinary, cultural. So I think it's a lot of learning from other people, and a lot of communication, trying to just leave the comfort zone. That would be my advice, my quick advice. And then to make it in practice, try to find internships that lead you to that, and finally, step by step, you can go to.
I would like to react to this question, because here I represent the PhD graduate program that opened this year at the University of Montpellier. Unis are beginning to address this problem of making the students adepts of interdisciplinarity in their studies. That's why we opened this program. We have actually here two students that started here. So the question on how to invent interdisciplinarity in students training is a big question, and I have some part of the answers to this program. First, you need to put into schedules opportunities for students to grasp some knowledge, introductory knowledge on other disciplines, and they have to with this kind of classes to select the one they want to actually diversify, because you can't address all the categories of knowledge, but you can interact with some of them and create something interesting. The other thing is how we can create processes to have common method on how organize a multidisciplinary project, and this is quite a difficult thing to do, because every research domain is organized very differently, very different values and processes. So unis are improving on the matter, and there are other programs that invested in, and you can find it online.
And it's open to international institutions. Again, I will give you the floor, maybe, unless you want to react to that.
I just want to do it.
Yes. Yes.
Many universities, the students don't find open where they create clubs or societies or associations outside of curriculum. They invite people who are not on the faculty. They do the research with the field. They invite people. It happens in hundreds of years. That's all.
So apply to existing marketers and looking at clubs, and I think already maybe on Eduardo's question.
Yeah, with pleasure, and I will elaborate on what you just shared with us about the process of students. I think it's about acculturation. It's about getting beyond than knowledge but also developing competencies to be able to take from different type of knowledge what will enable you for thinking in a transdisciplinary way. And this is exactly what we need to do all together, scientists, students as young scientists, but also with policymakers, with politicians. And I cannot, today, after a few years of experience, I will not conceive any development research project without involving politicians as stakeholders and members of the project, are real members of the project. And they contribute to the elaboration of, raising the problem, defining which problem are we addressing, what type of knowledge we need to better address it, what are the pathways for solutions, etc. But it's really a step-by-step process. And it is also a topic of research for us, is what are the levers and what should we unlock, what are the problems we should unlock for all people being able to activate their intelligence, but including politicians as well. And just to quickly answer about, I think it was your I don't remember about what is the result of this at institutional level in terms of change. In the field of One Health, for example, in some favorable context, maybe like in Laos, in Southeast Asia, we could, through a long-lasting transdisciplinary process of building trust also among different stakeholders. And it's not only about trust, it's also about opportunities. There is a problem arising, politicians, they have to react also. So they have the opportunity to instrumentalize a research project which is proposing a transdisciplinary framework to do it. They take it. So we should also be able to get instrumentalized by some, let's say, powerful stakeholders. Then they will play the game of transdisciplinarity also with us. It is going toward a win-win as a starting point. And then elaborating actions. And for these politicians, I think one of the key issues is also to be able to connect high level and local level. So because at local level, which is the level where we want things to be happening about this complex wicked problem, it is locally that it is happening. To unlock this, even public actors need to have mission orders, etc., from high level. So we cannot avoid to work fully with these high level politicians if we want also things to change at local level. But it is being able to involve them and trying the good entry point to get them involved.
Yeah, I really want to react quickly to Andrea's point about valorization and maybe related question for a quick answer. Do you have any indicators that these approaches that you are implementing have impacts on research policy and also for the communities themselves? This could help in valorizing actually scientifically what you're doing.
Actually, it's a really interesting point, and I agree from the fact that you have to have local, a different scale of implementation of transdisciplinarity and links between local stakeholders and national stakeholders. What I've seen from my experience is that as a scientist in transdisciplinary project, we can have two impacts. One impact is to change our way of doing research, meaning that to build common practices toward transdisciplinarity, and we need to discuss about this knowledge and these new practices within the scientific community, and that we can have a real impact. I think. If we build on what we learned from the transdisciplinary project. And the second impact, I really also seeing that stakeholders from the farmers to to the politician should be included in projects. And we had a project in Senegal on climate change in agriculture, and politicians were included from the start of the project. And there was within the project a scientist that was only dealing with the links between scientific science and the politicians, taking time to explain all the process, taking time to co-construct research questions, taking time to build the final meeting to really address issues that would be raised by the politician, and that the politician could bring back to the National Assembly to discuss. And I really think that what was interesting is that there was scientists working in the science, like climate scientists, agronomists, and there were scientists that were working on this process of co-construction knowledges, and all of us were working together. So, and that was a really interesting experience. I still don't know if the national politics in Senegal have changed toward what we learned from this project. I think we will need more time to see if it works. But still, we built trust. We know each other. So in a future project, we know how to interact. And it was really, I mean, for me, it changed my mind. And I must say that I went to this collaborative process because the donors say at the beginning, we want to have the local politician within the project. And so I really think that also donors has a key role to play to change research, because when they were asking us to go to interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, I mean, for some people it's natural, for some others it takes more time because we don't know really how to do it, and if we more or less don't, it's not like we have no choice, but if we are incentive to go, and I mean, it can change, and once you learn how to discuss from the beginning of the project to the last, you want to pursue. I mean, the collaboration is starts, and
maybe the last one. Yeah, there is one word that we did not pronunciate so far, but it's all about it. It's the competency of translation. And some of the scientists, they can be ecologists, epidemiologists, sociologists, but they are into this translation process. So it's really what you explain in the second example of this project, being able to get politicians involved in a research project, but then giving them clues so that they can discuss this at the National Assembly. And this is about the competency of translating issues and issues into research questions and research results into recommendations. And this is really a skill, a scientific skill that students should be, they could learn this also, but then it involves some change in the training program.
So we need more programmers, the one that was mentioned before. Thank you very much. We're running out of time, so I would like to make a big round of applause. I hope we would be able to continue the discussion with MAK'IT, because I'm sure we have plenty of things to discuss. I would like to keep some time because we have a very specially invited for the closing, and I would like him to share his thoughts about transdisciplinarity and any feedback on what you heard. Carlos Alvarez Pereira, the Vice President of the program, with us today, and we are really delighted and happy for that. And Carlos is also actually a member of our scientific council at MAK'IT, and he was participating in our conference of April on the role of science in crisis time. And just I would like to give a little bit more background on Carlos, because you have actually a transdisciplinary background yourself, just to give you some ideas, because it's so large I cannot say everything. Carlos has been trained as a researcher in systems dynamics. He is an entrepreneur in the digital sector. He is involved, scientifically speaking, in complexity thinking, something we know quite well here with Edgar Morin. and the transformation of knowledge and innovation to respond to the needs to the 21st century. So very aligned with what we are trying to do at MAK'IT. And at the Club of Rome, you call it the initiative of emerging new civilization, only that. And youth and intergenerational dialogue. So there are also some relationship with what we just discussed. And you are a member of many boards. And just to put one, you are one of the fellow of the World Academy of Art and Science, the world. So you are clearly the perfect person to close this first MAK'IT talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianne. Wait until I've spoken to say if I'm the perfect speaker for to close this session because I will continue provoking you. Sorry if you were expecting comforting, concluding remarks. This is not what you will get. Except for the comfort that I think you are doing very well. MAK'IT is doing very well in opening these very important conversations. So congratulations for that. And I very much think you should continue to do that. But the rest will be mostly provocations. There's been a very interesting sessions. I've taken a lot of notes, and I have quite a few comments. So, first, I will mention a couple of things about the Club of Rome, just for your information. The Club of Rome is a bizarre type of animal, an unidentified flying object. If we need to put ourselves in a box that people understand, we say that we're a think tank, a global think tank, which 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, we were born in 1968, that extraordinary year when everything happened in the same year. But 50 years ago, we published the report, The Limits to Growth, which raised an alarm, a well-heard alarm, because it sold millions of copies, on the risks of going forward with the same kind of human development we had at the time. And that's the background. Nowadays, a lot of time has passed. 4 years ago, on the occasion of the 50th anniversary, we had this question of what should the Club of Rome be in the 21st century, and we made a number of important changes. One, to elect new leadership with two ladies for the first time in the history of the club, Montpellier from South Africa and Sandrine Dixon-Leclerc from Belgium. An important message, but not only because, women just because they are women, but both are quite extraordinary. Montpellier, if you might know something about her, when she was your age or even younger, she created with Steve Biko and a few others the Black Consciousness movement in South Africa. By the way, exactly at the same time the Club of Rome was born. So interesting coincidence. Now she's co-president together with Sandrine. And we also promoted a way of working which is much more proactive, much more engaged in partnerships with other actors to address the challenges of our time, basically in two ways. One is more related to part of what we have been hearing today. How do we go to policymakers with ideas on what policies would be better suited to face the many challenges, convergent challenges we have, social, ecological, geopolitical, etc. And we just published a report titled Earth for All, Survival Guide for Humanity, which identifies a number of policies which would make sense in 5 areas: empowerment of women, fighting against inequality, new approach to ending poverty, and also 2 other areas, one of them which is very close to you because it's about food and agriculture and regenerative agriculture, and the other, of course, on energy and energy transition. But the second part of the Club of Rome is not about going to policymakers. It's about questioning how do we think, and what changes, what deep changes, what cultural change is needed to face the existential challenges we have. And this is that part on which, in which I am involved, and this, I'm guilty for proposing to elect a woman as co-president. I'm also guilty for creating this idea of emerging new civilizations. What is that about? The first thing I want to say is to quote a friend of mine, Azadeh Farashpour Javazmi, brilliant lady from Iran, who, by the way, works on soil and soil degradation and soil regeneration. So I should put her in contact with you. And she told me that her grandmother always said to her, Azadeh, don't speak about saving the world, think of serving the world. Wow, popular wisdom. That's a big shift from the idea of saving, to the idea of serving, and a call to humility. So my first comment would be, we really need to go that direction. A call to humility, also from wherever we are. I'm not now involved directly in an academic institution. I mean, indirectly, yes, but not. I started my career as a researcher and lecturer at the Polytechnic University of Madrid. And so I know well the academic world. Let me tell you, this is a provocation. And all our institutions have been failing, including science, including the academic establishment. Let's face that with humility. Because if not, we are cheating ourselves. If we think, as we very often do, that there is somebody else to blame, for instance, politicians and policymakers, because they don't listen to us, we're missing, I mean, I'm not saying this is wrong, but we are missing something essential. And in particular, in context of science, but not only science, or in its relation with technology and all that, the motto, save the world, is so often there, which shows arrogance rather than humility. And humility, in particular, in what aspects? There is one you mentioned, changing our paradigm, which has now become a very current expression. Sometimes if you pay attention to modern marketing, you might think that changing your model of iPhone or whatever is like changing the world. It's a change of paradigm. Come on, but there can be changes of paradigms at very different levels. And what we are saying is that although it looks like a philosophical discussion, and it is a philosophical discussion, changing the way we think is the most practical thing we can do. So it's not, or not only, an academic discussion, it's completely related to changing our relationship with the world, because the way we think frames the way we act. And this is one lesson coming from many different sources, but in particular from the Black consciousness movement, who started saying we will stop calling ourselves non-Europeans or non-whites in Africa. And we will break these mental jails. The mental are the worst jails of all. And we have, all of us, we have frameworks under which we interpret reality. But fortunately, and that creates blind spots, things that we simply don't see because we are interpreting reality or the perceptions we get from reality through those frameworks. Happily enough, we are able to realize that we have blind spots. A huge blind spot of modernity with a capital M. And it's so much ingrained in everything we think and we do, is that we have been ignoring the radical autonomy of actors. Of actors meaning humans, of course, but not only. Of all living beings and even of inanimate matter. You know, we have now climate warming. Well, we absolutely neglected and ignored the potential consequences of using fossil fuels. It's not that we didn't know, it's that we didn't care about the potential consequences of some of our actions. Aurelio Peccei, the founder of the Club of Rome, who was an outstanding personality, one of those such as Italy is able to produce. Italy is able to produce the best and the worst, as you know. But Aurelio was definitely part of the best, a successful businessman, but also a humanist, a committed person who fought against fascism and was jailed and tortured, and a visionary. He identified an issue with what he called the human gap. The human gap being the difference between our capacity to act and our capacity to understand the consequences of our actions. And he promoted the publication of another report to the Club of Rome, which is almost nobody knows, unfortunately titled No Limits to Learning, published in 1979, to address that human gap. A few years later, he said, well, we need a human revolution. That was 40 years ago. Human revolution is the revolution in our mentalities to overcome this idea that you as humans, or certain humans, some humans more than others, we can decide for others, for other humans, but also for nature, for all living beings and everything else, what is best to do, ignoring their radical autonomy, not paying attention to the fact that reality will never behave as we would like. You know, when we talk about goal-oriented objectives, beware of conscious purpose, because whatever you interact with, people, nature, whatever, will do something with your action, will react in some way. So ultimately, the atmosphere has created climate warming. Maybe this is just an expression, it's a provocation. It's just an expression that life, with a capital L, has decided, this human experiment was running for a while, but now let's get rid of them. You know, they are more destructive than anything else, and destructive of themselves. And there is a progressive shift in consciousness about that. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, in 2017 was saying that everything had gone well in the last decades of development, globalization, technology, blah, 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 except for two collateral effects. And I was shocked. I was there when he said that. I was shocked to hear collateral, because the two collateral effects were climate change and the rise of inequality. Collateral? 3 years later, now he's speaking of, we are waging war with nature, and this is a suicide. So you see the shift of consciousness. This shift of consciousness is, I think, what we have to undertake, especially from the side of science and the academic establishment, which is supposed to produce valid knowledge, which again is very arrogant. You know, we say, oh, this is not science. We talk about indigenous knowledge, and for most of the academic establishment, this is not yet even considered, and much less valued. And I'm happy to hear so much about that this morning, and that you are trying to work with that. Because as a matter of fact, all those humans, non-humans, inanimated matter are all of them interdependent beings, in constant co-evolution. And if we ignore that, we ignore the essential. So complexity is not an issue. Sorry. Complexity is the foundation of life. If you don't like complexity, try something different to life. You have basically one option. I wouldn't take it. But if you choose life, you have to take complexity with it. Complexity meaning your interactions, you will be interacting with other beings of any kind who have their autonomy and will do something in reaction to what you try to do. Of course, this means that but then we are not able to understand and to frame the problems we are trying to solve in ways that we can, master them, that we can control them, and find the right solution. Yes, it means exactly that. Forget about problems and solutions. Life doesn't have problems and solutions. Life might have questions and responses, which lead to new questions, which lead to new responses, and this never ends. And I heard the expression, which is not the first time, of course, I heard the expression, wicked problems, that I recommend not to use. Those are not big problems. Complexity is life. There is nothing wicked, except in our belief, coming from the onset of modernity 3 centuries ago, that we could, from our rational minds, understand the world and reduce it and control it. That is wicked. This arrogance that we can understand and control the world is wicked. Sorry. So humility, and that includes the question of maybe, or the idea that maybe we will never ever understand life. Because it's greater than us, we are part of life. So is it granted that we could understand something which is much bigger than us? Maybe not. A fundamental person in the history of systems thinking, and for the Club of Rome as well, because she was the lead author of the Limits to Growth report, Donella Meadows, was evolved during her lifetime from a more sort of mechanical perspective of systems thinking, with leverage points and ideas like that. And the last article was titled Dancing. So we have to convoke all kinds of all threads of knowledge and get more attuned to life. And I know I'm not saying something which is easy to do, especially from the disciplinary, rational, goal-oriented perspective of traditional academic establishment. But either we reconnect with life, we attune again with life, and the fact that life is always contextual. It's always dependent on concrete spaces. It's different. Manifestations of life are always different from one place to another. There is nothing really universal except very few list of laws of physics, and the fact that life is basically self-organized, not organized from remote places. Basically self-organized, incredibly diverse, and based on interdependence. So my provocation to you is learning from life. And to that end, we created the program in the Club of Rome that we called the fifth element. And the fifth element, of course, is the provocation, because the fifth element is life. Is to say we have to learn from that, because actually we know much more about how life works than we use in our social arrangements. Gregory Bateson, more or less at the same time that Aurélie Bechet was talking about the human gap, Gregory Bateson said the major problems we have come from the difference between how we think and the way life works. But actually we know a lot about how life works, but we don't use that in our social arrangements, because we immediately fall into the mechanistic paradigm, the control-oriented, reductionistic, performance-oriented, competition-oriented, etc., which is not how life works. So we created this program called the Fifth Element, which is also a tribute to ancient traditions. You have talked about that. I'm convinced we need as much ancient wisdom as what we call modern science. And we should be much more humble in labeling some things with the science thing, science word and others. So I know that physics has been amazing in the production of facts, which can be verified. By the way, physics has been amazing also in its capacity to change paradigms a long time. If you think of classical mechanics, any physicist will say to you, yes, this is a paradigm which works in certain circumstances, but there are so many things that it doesn't explain that, of course, we don't use it when we talk about nuclear physics. We have not undergone that journey in many other disciplines, most notably in economics, which is a fundamental discipline organizing the power, how the power is set and shaped and transformed or not. Karl Deutsch said that power is the ability not to have to learn anything. I think that power today is more the ability to impose what can be learned without challenging power, and what cannot be learned. So our proposal, and Patrick is a partner in crime in this, is to put upside down the model of knowledge creation. Put upside down, somebody said, I don't know who, but the quote is so good. People have problems, universities have departments. Well, it would be good if the process of knowledge creation would be able to work from the questions that people have. And one of the things we are doing in the fifth element is exactly to sense what is happening, because we believe in emergence. That's part of the complexity thinking. And of course, part of that in my personal case comes from Edgar. I'm a fan of him and read a lot from him. But the idea of emergence is all over the complexity theory. And the emergence is something that you cannot control. You cannot plan for it. But it happens in certain critical conditions. And in our view, it is happening everywhere, but below the radar or out of any radar. And it's happening when communities decide, oh, we have to shift. We need really something magic happen, and maybe there is a catalyst. Typically, there is somebody who plays the role of a catalyst to empower those communities to get them out of helplessness. And an example again in South Africa is the elite schools. One guy decided, inspired by Paulo Freire in Brazil and the Black Consciousness movement, he decided we have to do something in the poorest places in South Africa, in the townships. And he decided to create new schools where the respect for the kids was the foundation. How to act in a way which ensured that the kids would feel they are able, they are capable. That's just one example. There are many more. And I think what we have also to look, also from the perspective of academic research, is sense what is emerging, put upside down the model, and work from there. And that implies many things. That implies getting out of many things, including, for instance, the concept. I know all of this is quite provocative and will not solve your life if you expect that, oh, we'll have a few things, to go forward in a very few way. No, sorry, this is an exploration. This is a journey of exploration, not for the faint of heart. But aren't we explorers? I mean, if you look at the history of humanity, if there is something which comes out, is that the incredible capacities of exploration. Without all our technology, all that, people have been able first to populate the world. So this is an invitation to exploration, to a journey which we don't know, we don't have a map. But it's better to know, because sometimes I have the feeling that people act as if they have a map of, street map of New York, and they are in the middle of the jungle, and they pretend that that street map of New York is useful. Much better to realize, no, this guy is completely useless, and now let's explore. And it's also, of course, if it is about exploration, is how do we work together? And two last comments is in that, let's explore together. We question very much the notion of stakeholders. I think we have to go beyond that. Stakeholders, engagement, etc. Well, that might work well for incremental improvements. When we want to improve a situation, optimize something, etc. But we're not there. We are at the moment of existential challenges. Even the UN Secretary General says that now. In a way, I think the pandemic opened the minds of many people to the reality that collapse is possible. And then this is an opportunity also to be brave and to try something else. And one of those things is stakeholders, come on, all stakes are at risk. So what we do in the fifth element is to convince people as they are. I mean, we're not saying get rid of what you know, get rid of all your experiences. No, not that at all. But come as people. Talk as people. And it's very interesting how in the meetings we have to feel the dissonance between the official discourse and what people really feel. That dissonance is, official discourse. We are pursuing the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and making progress towards that. Yeah, okay. Real feeling of the same person, we are not going to make it. And with the anxiety it creates. And that anxiety can be a source of energy. Can go wrong, it can go into cynicism or whatever, but it can be also a source of energy. So what we are saying is, what if we really continue, take and follow the invitation made by MAK'IT in this conference in April, What's Role for Science in Times of Crisis, I would say in times of collapse, and what if we engage real conversations about what does it mean to be responsible from the perspective of science? What does it mean to be responsible in the 21st century? What kind of social processes, as you are already doing in your practical experiences, what kind of social processes for this creation of new knowledge, or creation of useful knowledge to face the challenges in the places, in the territories, and definitely not the least, what could we do to reframe the agendas of science? And most notably, of course, the agendas of funding. How scientific funding agendas are framed. Because let's be honest, most of it by far most of it is just contributing to continue the same kind of extractive and suicidal model that we have today. So that's the invitation. You are all invited to be part of this fifth element thing, which is not even a project. It's a call to sort of mobilization, but the mobilization to change the way we think and how we explore together. Thank you. Sorry for being long.
That's all. Thank you very much for this very impactful thought, and I think it will bring several shifts of consciousness in our very humble assembly. But I think everything counts in the project that you envisioned, this global project, and I don't know, Patrick, if you want to add anything, but for me, it's something really. I could listen to Carlos for 3 hours. For those who are a bit hungry or both, we have some nice food outside. If it's there, some problem with the coffee break, but I'm sure there is some food on the left, and we can continue explore that and this fifth element, see what we can do maybe on the meeting side, but we will have more chance to discuss that later. Thanks to